Our next talk is titled, Nothing Matters, The Search for Meaning When Data and Trust Go Missing. And this talk is presented by Mike Cisneros and Alex Velez. Mike is an award-winning data visualization specialist and a two-time Tableau visionary. As a data storyteller for Storytelling with Data, he teaches individuals and organizations how to transform complex analyses into compelling, clear, visual messages that are both understood and impactful. He is the co-author of the upcoming Storytelling with Data, Before and After Practical Makeovers for Powerful Data Stories, as well as several books in the data-focused Ruby Marks Adventures series for young readers. He enjoys musical theater and cats, but somehow can't stand cats with a capital C. Also same. Alex is a data storyteller at Storytelling with Data and is also a co-author of the upcoming book, Storytelling with Data, Before and After Practical Makeovers for Powerful Data Stories. Her experience as a dance fitness instructor and peer educator taught her the importance of crafting messages tailored for the audience. Once she began incorporating this important learning into her more technical roles, data engineering and analysis, she was surprised at the immediate positive reaction to her work. Now she spends her time assisting others by helping them tell their stories more effectively. Let's welcome Mike and Alex. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, those intros were so long. Who submitted those?
He did.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex, and as she mentioned, we are data storytellers at Storytelling with Data. Basically, our focus is to teach people at organizations how to communicate more effectively with their data. And ultimately, what this means is we have a front row seat to a lot of the challenges that people are facing when they try to communicate their data. And there is this one common theme that is starting to creep in more and more. In fact, I would guess that probably every single person here today and on the call has probably encountered it as well. So let's look at this through the lens of an example.
All right, so normally when Alex and I present together, we are teaching workshops to clients, maybe who don't have the same affinity for data visualization as the folks here in the room. So we're teaching them a little bit about some of the common pitfalls, things to do, things not to do. So we're showing them this example. Look, it's continued quarterly operating leverage streak in 2022. What a grabber of a title. So, but clearly what they're trying to show in this graph is from the first quarter of 15 to the last quarter of 22, their operating leverage streak has been unbroken. So for this company, operating leverage means their net revenue change is bigger than their net expense growth. So yes, revenue bigger than expense, obviously. Thing is, there's also this little mark here that says, oh, by the way, there was a little break in the operating leverage streak. Not really a streak then, is it? So what we're saying to the people in the room is you can't do this sort of thing. First of all, you've got time series data, so you have to be authentic about the intervals of time you're showing. So let's show how big that gap is so people know how much you're messing with the data. And then you say, well, clearly this isn't missing data. You obviously know what the data is before and after, so what you hiding? Like clearly they're either hiding a little bit of an operating loss or a huge operating loss. We don't know. But in the room, we're telling people, even if this is another situation where you just have missing data, it's just like you haven't collected it for whatever reason, you still have to show the timeline because the nothing that you have there still matters. And then one guy raises his hand because he's got a dad joke loaded and ready to go, and he says, so, sounds like you're saying that nothing matters. You know, ha ha ha, yes, nothing matters. But the thing is, it kind of hits home a little bit with us and maybe with some other people here because it definitely does feel like sometimes, at least lately, with what we do in data, it feels like nothing matters.
And it's interesting to think how such a lighthearted comment about a very specific incident can have such a deeper meaning. But that is actually the premise for this talk. It's about that missing data that Mike just shared, or maybe I should say the missing trust in data. Because it's this lack of trust that is really becoming pervasive in a lot of our different audiences. And so today's gonna feel a little bit like a group therapy session, if you will, and I think that's okay.
Thanks, Bridget.
Right? I think all of us need that a little bit. So it can be helpful to sometimes start by trying to understand where is this lack of trust coming from. Now, some of it is incredibly easy to pinpoint, right? Maybe your audience encountered a misleading graph at some point along the way, and now they're a little bit skeptical. Sure, that's warranted. In fact, that's probably a little bit encouraged. We should have our audiences looking critically at the data that we share. But what we're talking about here is something much bigger, something that is brewing under the surface. It is this resentment almost, right? This distrust of facts, of institutions, of data itself. And so what do we start to do in these scenarios? Because as data communicators, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We're just trying to share our insights at a time when it feels like hard proven facts are up for negotiation. So this is where we can start to use storytelling tactics. And so Mike and I are going to share some strategies that we've been using that help us overcome some of the challenges that we face with our disconcerting audiences. First of which is to simply lead with empathy. Now, empathy is sometimes thought of as a soft skill, but that's not the case, right? Empathy can be incredibly strategic. So I want you to imagine a scenario where maybe I had to present some eviction rate data. My audience is a city council. These are folks that have just spent the last year of their life working incredibly hard on various reforms to help ease the burden of the housing crisis for their constituents. So I looked at the data, and yeah, I can see some improvement, but it's not where it needs to be. I've got to share this insight with them. So one approach that I might have is to share a visual that looks like this, where all of that red highlights where there are still evictions happening at a rate that we're not comfortable with. Maybe when I present this data, I say, hey, I've analyzed it, and basically what I found is that the eviction rate is unacceptably high. Yeah, that's an approach, but it's probably not going to work very well, right? My audience is going to immediately be dismissive. They're going to become defensive. Some might start to poke holes in this data because they know the work that they're doing is not being represented in what I'm sharing. So this is where empathy can help, and that might be a better approach, where I pause, I consider my audience, and I think about, well, what do they care about? What do they want to see when they look at this data? That might help me create a slightly different version of this visual that maybe looks like this, where I start talking about the change to that baseline in those eviction rates. Maybe when I present this, I say something like, I know you've been hard at work, and actually the data reflects that. We can see some improvement in the blue areas there, but the data also shows us areas where there are opportunities, where people are still falling through the crack. And so I'd like to use the time today to discuss how can we further help them. It's a completely different response from my audience. So empathy is not about being manipulative. It's about framing the data in a way that can help our audience see the data and see insights that they wouldn't previously do. So that's one strategy we could use.
Yeah, finding common ground is similar to this, because leading with empathy is connecting you with your audience, but finding common ground is when you have a bunch of different constituencies and they're all in conflict with one another. They're like these tall trees where it seems like there's no connection amongst all of them. But our job is to figure out what are the root systems? Where do they connect underground? What are the common themes that they all have, the common needs or goals that we can start from, so that instead of leading from conflict, we lead from agreement. So imagine, for instance, you're presenting test results for a school system or for a county. So you're in a school committee meeting, so there's elected officials, there's administrators, there's teachers, there's parents. You show up and you say, well, the data shows that 4th grade, 8th grade math, science, they're all much lower than they were 5 years ago. You start there, and what happens immediately? Well, the blame game, of course. Parents blame the administrators, the teachers blame the school committee, and you're not going to get anywhere. But we know there is definitely common ground here because everybody's in that room for one reason. They all care about the kids. They all care about the educational opportunities that those kids should have. So maybe we just layer on a little bit more detail and we start from positives. We start where nobody can get offended. And we say, look, we understand we're still trying to gain back some of the learning losses that happened to us during the pandemic. Can't blame any of the people in the room for the pandemic, by the way. So you say, we're trying to gain back some of those losses, which is why a few years ago we put a lot of effort into who we all agreed were the most vulnerable kids in our system, the youngest kids. And look what has happened. Those test scores in that 4th grade level have gone up in both reading and math. So we know what we're doing is working, and kudos to all of you. From there, everybody's happy, everybody's in agreement, and then you can start talking about how do you allocate resources to make these increases happen across all the other things. What you have done, instead of sowing discord from the very beginning, is found that common ground so that you can build bridges between people with different opinions and then lead to more positive outcomes from there.
Another tactic is to simply go beyond the numbers, right? Really start to blend stories with your statistics. Now, there's this common belief that when we communicate qualitative and quantitative data, it needs to be an either-or situation. But I don't think that's how it should be. In fact, if we can pair these things together, we can enable our audience to interact with the data in a totally new way. So I want to share an example where we were working with a client. Now, I've got to anonymize things just for confidentiality. So let's call this client Nell's Feast.
Who's Nell?
Nell is my dog. This is a pet food manufacturer, and every single year they do a customer survey. The goal is to understand why their customers are purchasing certain pet food. Now, the insights from the survey are shared broadly across the organization, so the way that they share it has to be pretty general. Here's one of the slides that they created, and they're trying to communicate what are the top 3 preferences that go into the decision to buy dog food kibble. And so you can see each one of those preferences supported by verbatim comments. This is an incredibly verbose way of communicating this information. And quite frankly, it was not working. It was not landing with the intended audiences. So we made some recommendations, and we said, what if you really lean into those stories and then start to support the stories with data? For example, if one of the themes that you're trying to communicate is just that people care more about the ingredients in their dog's kibble, lean into that. Find a real-world scenario. Pair it with an image that resonates. Check out the difference when you see this. This poor dog, Bailey, right, is suffering. It's itchy because of the ingredients in its kibble. You can't help but feel something when you see this dog struggling in this way. When we start to communicate qualitative data, we can help our audience connect with the actual insights. We also encourage them to go beyond just sharing that qualitative data. Think about how they could categorize, aggregate, quantify the data. That opens up new visuals that they could use, like perhaps this simple bar chart that you see here, where we can show all of the different preferences, still highlighting those top 3. Or maybe if we have these survey results from every single year, we could start to show how the trends have changed over time with the bump chart that you see. Now, our client was actually able to start combining these things, where they paired the stories that they found with these visuals. And they created a single slide that looked like this, where every single one of those top preferences was supported by a real-world scenario. And so stories are not about replacing data, but rather giving data and numbers a bit more meaning for your audience. And sometimes that's all you have to do, is you have to remind your audience that it's not about the numbers. In fact, data often represents something living behind it. And if we can remind that of them, we can maybe disarm them in a way that buys us enough time that we can start to build back that trust.
And the last thing we wanted to talk about was uncertainty. And I think this came up a little bit earlier today as well. Don't pretend that you know stuff that you don't. Be honest about the limits of your expertise, because then you can be forthright about where those limits are, and people will build trust with you within those boundaries. Now, I was reading a book recently, it's a science fiction book. The introduction had a quote that I particularly liked, which was that to live amid uncertainty is inevitable, but to acknowledge it is to live as a grown-up. We all need to be grown-ups here. Yes, thank you. You have to understand that really nothing is perfectly certain in our day-to-day lives. And so we have statistical agreements about what we consider certain or uncertain, but still there's always some variation. And the people that we find trust in are the people who are transparent. I think Yu-Ching said this today. It's the people who are transparent about what it is they know and what they don't know. Think back to early COVID reporting, as a matter of fact. People who were honest about, hey, look, this is the current data, but there's so much we don't know. It could change tomorrow, so we'll be cautious about what we say. Those are the people who you ended up trusting a lot more as time went on. So get comfortable saying things like, hey, I don't know the answer to this, but maybe I could look into it more. Or this is what the data is hinting towards, but we can't say anything for sure right now. It's too early to tell. We don't have enough information. Or even, nobody on Earth can tell you the answer to this question, and if they say they can, they're just telling you what you want to hear. Yes, precision is important, but transparency is where the trust is going to come back. So talking about these 4 different tactics that we've used, these are the things that have helped us connect more successfully with our audience. They've helped our clients connect more successfully with their audiences. But what you'll notice is that none of this is really about how you design your graphs or how you design your slides. It's more about thinking critically about the needs of the people you're talking to. How can your audience understand or connect with or feel the message resonate with them so that they're more likely to hear what it is that you need to share? And this, sure, all works most of the time. But there are some cases where you do all of this stuff and it doesn't really pan out. And that's the part that is hardest for us to deal with. What if none of this works? It's super disheartening, right? And then you start to ask yourself questions like, why bother? Why do I bother doing this if the people who I'm talking to aren't going to engage with what I'm sharing with them? Maybe you just don't react to data that contradicts what they have already heard or believed, or maybe you just see one time and then again and again and again you try these techniques and they don't work, or you hear your colleagues are having the same problem, or you see it in the world, and your belief starts to get tested. Because you want to believe, we all want to believe that the things that we do matter. We want to believe that this vocation we've chosen for ourselves is going to create positive change in the world. And I'm using the word belief on purpose, because we all do have shared beliefs. We believe in the power of data. We believe in the scientific method. We believe that there's such a thing as objective facts. And we believe that we have the possibility, the capability of communicating effectively to people. So when our faith is tested, when our belief systems are tested, there's really no external thing that we can turn to get through. It's all down to our own resilience and our resolve. So we do want to talk about a few things that Alex and I have found that carry us through in those moments when our faith is tested the most.
So graceful. First is a bit of a perspective change. I can tell you early in my career, I felt like if I had put in work, I should be met with success, right? If I spent time making the great visual, figuring out how to present it in a way that would resonate and be clear, my audience should immediately applaud me, right? They should buy into everything I'm saying.
Well done.
That wasn't the case, right? I set myself up for quite a bit of disappointment. And when I take a step back and I think about it, if my goal is to influence change, to encourage and persuade somebody to act in a certain way, I can't expect that to happen in an instant, because belief is not transactional, right? It's something slow, it's quiet, it takes time. And so instead, we want to start to look for signs of progress, and that may present itself in a way that you're not expecting. Maybe the next time you communicate your data, you're met with somebody who asks a slightly better question. That is a sign of success. Or maybe somebody says to you, hey, do you mind sending that to me? I'd love to look at that more later on. That's a great sign that you've had an impact. Or maybe it's just you hear whispers that somebody was referencing the work that you did in an environment that you didn't even know was happening. That is a really good sign that you have been successful. So try not to measure the success of the work that you're sharing necessarily in the volume of applause or the number of conversions that you have, but rather start to think about it in the number of questions, the number of thoughts, the conversations that you spark, and recognize that you may not always be present for when those things happen, right? Change is small, but it's these small changes that will compound over time. You've just got to give it the time for that to actually happen.
Move fast and break things. One of my least favorite phrases. No, move slow and fix things. You know who had this who talked about this yesterday was Jose. When you talked about participatory data for an inclusive world. You had people come to a public space and interact with physical data. They got to learn more about their world to the level of interest that they had on their own timetable. This is positive change, and you are not saying you have to do this now. You're doing it at your own pace. But this is what we can measure success by. It doesn't have to be a clock on it. It just has to progress. So we should get comfortable thinking about when we create visualizations, it's okay if people don't get the whole message right away. Maybe they only get a part of it. It's okay if we share information that ends up getting pulled out of its original context and shared around, oh no! That's fine. More people are going to see it that way. Maybe it affects somebody that you never even knew it was going to connect with. And it is fine if it takes delivering the same or similar messages more than once, more than twice, 5, 10 times until somebody actually gets it. Because your job is to be consistent, reliable, durable, resilient. Data visualization isn't meant to be an now or never proposition. It's supposed to just be there, something that people can reference, can refer back to, so that when they are ready, it's there to provide them what they need. You know, we asked a couple of the people on the stage, I think Rachel and James earlier today, we asked them, what makes you likely to trust a visualization? And their first answer was the person creating it. You want to be that person who is consistent and durable and reliable and has built that trust with your audience by being consistent over time, moving slow and fixing things at your own pace.
It's incredibly easy to focus all of your energy sometimes on the loudest people in the room, right? Maybe it's the manager that always disagrees with you. If you say yellow, they're going to say purple. Maybe it is the person that has to feel like the smartest person in the room, so they're always disrupting you. Or maybe it's just the client that's never going to trust the numbers. But if we focus all of our attention there, we exclude a larger part of our audience, because oftentimes it's the loudest people that represent a minority. The majority of our audience looks very different. There's actually much more quiet. They're in their heads. They're cautiously considering everything that you've said and deciding if they want to agree with you or not. These are the people that are likely to move your work forward in ways that you probably can't imagine. So don't just design for the critic, but design for the other people in the room that may be a little bit quieter, that may actually eventually become future allies.
The last one is most important, protecting your own joy. This is non-negotiable, but it is personal. When it feels like everything is conspiring against you and you're feeling pressure and exhaustion and defeat, it is too hard for that to seep into your work and then into your personal lives. And we cannot let that happen. You have to remember what it was that gave you that spark that drew you to this vocation in the first place and hold on to it. For me, it's talking to a group of people and seeing the light of recognition on their faces when I explain something in a way maybe they wouldn't have thought of, using a clever metaphor or a visual, or just explaining things in a way that actually resonates. For others, it might be seeing that people have read the work that they've published in the New York Times and are so moved by it, they want them to create a PDF of the newspaper and send it to them in Texas. For you, it might be something different. It might be solving a challenging visual puzzle or mentoring somebody who you might be earlier in their career and you're showing them how to do things with grace, with heart, and with skill. This is also a little bit of an act of resistance. This is why it is a non-negotiable, because you have to continue to demonstrate your own creativity and your care as an act of defiance in the face of people who do want you to give up.
So our hope in giving this talk is that it has just helped you to recalibrate a little bit. Hopefully you will remember these 4 tactics here the next time you're not feeling so hopeful or you don't necessarily feel like your work is having the value that it should. But more importantly, you can use these tactics to really protect the part of you that found interest in this field in the first place, the part of you that knows that communicating data matters and it's what can actually start to change the world and make a difference.
And also, please do keep showing up. Keep showing up with care, with clarity, and with crazy, optimistic, honesty, because what really matters in this world is just the people in it. And I think all of us got into data to help the people in it, and we're trying to honor and uplift and protect the people in this world. And I I look around the room and I see a bunch of people who maybe have felt some of these things along the way, and now you all have this shared language. You have this shared experience. You know you can now draw on one another because we are all going to support one another when we feel this way, and you know that you are not alone in this. So I have one last thing that we have to do before this talk ends, which is make a correction, because I do not want you to leave here thinking that the title of this talk is the Nothing Matters talk, because that's wrong. This is, in fact, the People Matter talk, because that's all that actually matters in this world. So if you want to talk more about this with Alex or me, now is a good time if you have questions. If you want to talk to us about the things we do professionally usually, I would invite you to check out our upcoming book. Our boss would really like you to check out our upcoming book. So feel free to check it out there. But if there is any time left, we are happy to take your questions. Can I click down the stairs? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Sure.
So we have a question from cyberspace. This question is
Hi,
from
cyberspace.
aka Elizabeth. Can you share the most surprising turnaround with someone who didn't want to hear you coming around because of your approach?
Excellent question. Normally I'd kick it to you because I don't have one thinking, right at the top of my head. Got one? Yeah, my colleague.
That's why we're a team. I don't know if it's necessarily the best moment, but this is maybe the moment that made me realize that this is the field that I want to be in. So I was presenting to a husband and wife that ran a company. They were the CEOs. It is not the company that we work at now because I'm in the exact same situation. But they cared deeply about their organization. And the reality is that when they set it up as a startup, things weren't as structured as they should be. And so I had to give a talk basically about how we needed to completely redo the entire data team and how we were collecting data and how we defined things. And I really took the time to incorporate all of the principles that storytelling with data taught after I had attended a workshop. And it was the first moment that I was able to see somebody care about what I wanted and not just cut me off in the middle and tell me to stop doing what I'm doing, but they wanted to hear why this mattered. And that was the place that I approached it from. And so I think just taking the time to consider your audience, create a visual that you know that they will resonate with and frame it accordingly is one of those ways to disarm people. And it just made me realize that if I can spark a conversation with data, this is what I want to do for a living. And that's how I ended up working for the company.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions here? Okay, great, because I have one. I'm curious.
Is this from you directly?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm grateful I get the chance. So I'm curious, what does it really mean to visualize data with empathy, and how do you account for your positionality in the process? And what if you fall short of empathy? What if you're patronizing? I guess, what does it really mean to have empathy in this?
Is the question, what does it mean to be human?
Fair enough, but I guess
Because that, I'm sorry that that's an arch response, but that actually is. We can only do the best we can do in any moment. We try and be empathetic as much as we can. We try and understand the people that we're talking to, but we are going to fail. That is the basic premise of being on Earth. But you try again. That is the nice thing, is that you often get another opportunity to do this. And we're not really judged. That's part of what we're talking about, is we're not trying to be binary about, was this a success, was this not a success? Is this better than it could have been? Will the next one be more successful? Was I not considerate of the people that I was communicating with, and therefore next time I need to be more thoughtful about it, or talk to more people, or just include more people in the discussion ahead of time? I think that's all we can ask of anybody, as much as we can ask it of ourselves. So that's all I can say for that.
Yes, thank you so much. Do we have any other Q&A from the virtual folks?
No more questions, but we did get an "I'm not crying, you're crying."
Yeah, I feel like I'm having a very existential moment in my database practice right now. Okay, we can do one more question, and then we'll move to our next talk.
So the part that said speak to the quiet ones, I think maybe you want to say listen to the quiet ones, and I'm trying to figure out how to get the quiet ones to speak.
talk to that one? All right. Well, my thought is that there are always the people who are, they don't have a question, they have more of a comment. You know, these are the people who are the ones who are always in the meetings. They're the ones who are sucking up the air, the ones who are taking the attention. So the quiet ones, we do want to hear from them, but we also want to make sure that we are not forgetting them in the communications. The stuff that we are saying and sharing is landing with people who aren't verbally responding or maybe aren't, you know, excitedly, bobble-headedly nodding along with what we're saying. Yes, obviously we want to hear from them, but sometimes the people who are, I guess, often labeled as the quiet ones maybe are more comfortable in a one-on-one situation. So yes, maybe you want to hear from them, but maybe you want to put them in situations where they're more likely to share things and feel comfortable sharing things, rather than in a room where the loud people are always going to be taking up the space. But I agree with you, you do want to hear from everybody as much as possible. But for you, feeling better about what you're doing, don't forget that there are other people other than the people who are the loudest in the room who are also listening and taking in what you're saying. I see Alex over there. You're ready to go. Thank you, everybody.